Namaste. Welcome to my channel. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today we have a very interesting panel of the undergraduate students from different colleges of this country. And we're going to discuss a lot of interesting things like society, politics, woke culture, college life, college activism, and so on. So I will start by asking my panelists to introduce themselves. So Pratham, first you.
Thank you, sir. Hi, my name is Pratham Kalra, and I am from Chandigarh. I'm currently a second-year undergraduate student at Shriram College of Commerce, studying Bachelor's in Commerce Honours. And I take active interest in politics, but as such, I haven't really engaged in any political space or any political work per se. It's just something that I like to read about and something that gathers my interest. Thank you.
Ojasvi.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me here, Abhinav sir. My name is Ojasvi. I'm a first-year sociology honors student at Hindu College, University of Delhi. My interests are primarily law, policy, and politics, and recently I became a member of ABVP.
Oh, Pratik.
At the very outset, I would like to thank Abhinav sir for inviting me. So basically, I'm a final year student at Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai, and also I am the president of Student Bar Council. My interest lie in so basically the constitutional law, and I am the active member of Vidyarthi Parishad as well.
Okay. So before starting let's say, coming to the heavy topics, I just want to ask you people about what is the political scene in your colleges? I mean, do other people participate in the active politics, in the college politics, or outside the college, maybe the university level politics or the mainstream politics? Like Pratik, you said that you are a member of ABVP. So could you please elaborate upon your political journey and also what is the political scene in your institution?
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to begin with that unlike what Ojasvi and Pratham must have witnessed in their college life, the student politics and student activism in the northern states, that kind of politics is not seen or is there in Maharashtra because there is a reason behind this. Because of certain tragedies, the university's elections are banned in Maharashtra. My university is exceptional to this because my university is governed by different act. So my decision contesting an election was mere an accident. What I feel, because I decided to contest election just one day before filing the nomination. So despite I being the active member of Vidyarthi Parishad, I never bring my ideology in my work. So irrespective of ideological differences, I work for every student uh, at every class of student, and whosoever requires me at whatever time, I'm available for him.
Okay. Ojasvi, what about you? What's the political scene? Or you have just entered the college and you are that unlucky batch that you have online classes. But I'm pretty sure being in sociology honors, which is known for quite extreme views, your experience might be quite interesting.
It definitely is. Well, I think the first thing I would want to say is no matter if a student is a part of a student union like a Vidyarthi Parishad or ISA or any union for that matter, I think what is significant about our generation is that everyone has opinions and everyone is politically charged that way, that they would want to be involved in and participate in whatever is happening in the society. So whatever their political inclinations might be, and even if they're not active members in direct politics, they will always want to participate. So I think that is something you can't take away from this generation, even when colleges are closed. So for instance, we have our WhatsApp group, class groups of different subjects, and you keep seeing all of the current affairs, international, national, being discussed frequently in it, because that's just something that I think is very significant to my generation. So even if they don't start colleges soon, I'm pretty sure the discussions that are going on in the WhatsApp groups will keep me engaged.
So you people are the student of the WhatsApp University. This is what you're telling us?
But
Okay.
we try to fact check.
Pratham, what about you? You are from SRCC, which is known to be not much political, but more career oriented. We only have economics and BCom honors out there. So no political science, no sociology, no fun.
Yes and no, in the sense that I think historically, ever since like you yourself have been a part of the college for the longest time now, and I think it's pretty much evident that for the longest time the college has rather maintained a neutral stance on politics. We have college elections that take place. We do elect a president. We do vote in the Delhi University elections at large. But I think in particular, we do not have such an active space that allows for, say, like political processes in particular to take place. In saying so, that not all the students per se are very involved in politics. Of course, when the right issues strike the chord, we have people from SRCC protesting, we have people standing for the cause, but students largely, as you've mentioned, are not very oriented towards, say, pursuing this as a particular passion and going ahead and, say, contesting elections or getting themselves involved in the youth wings of political parties and the likes. So yeah, I think we're largely very neutral. And in a way, it's also good because I think it also helps you to look at things from a very different perspective. In a scenario where you have, say, colleges that are very polarized, it just clouds your judgment because it helps you, allows you to live in an echo chamber wherein you're not able to understand the better side. So I think, yeah, in a way that is sort of helpful.
So let me ask, what is the mechanism of the political discourse in your generation? How do you get knowledge, information, news? How are the opinions formed? Is it just via WhatsApp, or the people also read books these days, or they don't just don't?
I think for most bit, a lot of friends that I know are indulging in active reading every day. So I think that's there. Maybe not a lot of newspapers, but I think the new generation has hopped on to newsletters very actively, and it's something that they do catch up on, especially with the convenience of you being able to read it wherever you want and not having to carry a paper. So I think that's one. Podcast is another. I'm a part of the debating society, so we also have a group wherein we keep sharing links that we find interesting, and I think that's true for a lot of other societies in our college as well. And I think largely, given that people do not really participate in politics doesn't mean that they are aloof to the process. I think everybody that I know in my college takes keen interest in it and specifically has an opinion on almost everything that's going on. So I think the interaction, which is a good and a bad thing together, obviously, but I think the interaction also largely helps you frame your opinion as well.
Mm-hmm. Ojasvi, what about you? You are from sociology honors, which is, and we have this curious phenomenon both in the West and also in India, something called woke, the woke culture.
Yes.
Did you encounter that in the college or in the school, perhaps?
Well, actually, yes, even in school, right? So in school, I was part of the debating society, all MUNs and things which require you to do research and work on current affairs, basically. So I think I would like to say two things here. First of all, I think wokeness is everywhere, but more importantly, a lot of people think that student activism is something which is a recent phenomena, which it actually isn't. So when you have discussions with students in colleges and school, they think that this is something that is specific to this generation alone, and it's not, because if you see, student activism has played a very crucial role throughout history. We've had so many events where a student has played such a crucial role. For instance, we had students fighting against apartheid in Africa. We had the student protests in Beijing, the Tiananmen Square protests. We had the White Rose Society of students who were fighting against Nazi Germany. So that has been going on since before we were even born. But what is different in the student activism these days versus then is that we are all just so intolerant these days. You talk to students and there are so many who would rather not even have discussions with you if they know that you belong to a different political inclination than their own, right? You have students who outrage over about just anything. And that is a consequence of the increasing wokeness that's around us, because wokeness is basically making all students in high school, in college, so extremely sensitive and so extremely intolerant towards other opinions that they would just, leave you be and not have a healthy conversation with you if you don't belong to their ideological line. And one really, a really, important event that happened in my life that showed me what's actually going on is that when I started speaking up in school about what my political inclinations are, I was actually scared, because we have these mobs and groups in schools and colleges who think that they know everything just because they go through Instagram stories and Instagram posts about what is happening in the world, and then they presume that they have all the knowledge, all the skills that are required to have conversations. But what it actually made me realize was that there are enough students in schools and colleges who do not speak up because of that. Because we are creating this entire environment where, since you outrage over everything, over the tiniest of issues, the students who maybe are not as well aware or maybe do not follow your line of thought, they are apprehensive in talking about what they think. And that's what's been happening to me. I get so many texts from my juniors, from people who don't even know me, who see me post and write online. Ojasvi, how do you do this? How do you face the peer pressure? How do you deal with this? And I think that is just such a dangerous place to be in. And this is one of the reasons why I am the most anti-woke person you will ever meet in my college.
That is interesting, and clearly that is a problem these days. So, on the Twitter, we saw I'll not take the Twitter handle's name, but the person was inciting mob violence against the Reliance superstores. That there's no point in vandalizing the Geo towers. Just go and start vandalizing the shops of the Reliance and Reliance Fresh and all those places. So, Pratham, coming to the bigger picture, how do you read what is happening in the country, in the national politics? You have this phenomenal rise of the BJP, which is now pushing the boundaries, entering into unconventional regions like Kashmir, Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. And there are other people who are also getting equally charged up, and you see this kind of protests which are happening in the country. So, how do you read how the political scenario is playing out? And not just you, in the sense that what do the people in your generation around you think about these issues?
I think around me is a fairly simple narrative that I think largely everybody who's protesting and everybody sympathizes with the protesters. And largely we feel like to that extent, I think the government in a lot of ways could have done a lot more to listen to the demands of the people who are protesting out there in the cold. Given that in mind, and when you ask me to understand and see as to where I see the country heading and in terms of like politics, I personally feel that this year is going to be very crucial. I think three states are going to polls in 2021. West Bengal's never seen a BJP government per se. I think Tamil Nadu has never seen a BJP government. Kerala also to that extent. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. What we've seen in Bangalore and what we've seen in Rajasthan through, say, the likes of, say, Vasundhara Raje is the fact that, a lot of these BJP leaders are not, say, the only people who are driving the BJP agenda up there through the center, which is through, say, the Prime Minister Modi's charismatic leadership, in terms of saying that, okay, Prime Minister Modi at the top has that sort of charisma that drives, say, BJP's electoral victories in a lot of these states. But I think to that extent, a lot of the state leaders, for example, this Vasundhara Raje or I think Yediyurappa in Bangalore, have some sort of charm on their own and they resonate with the people over there at large. So I think seeing how those alliances will pan out will be very interesting in terms of knowing what the BJP's future in the country is going to be like. I personally feel that given more and more people ultimately become a part of the electorate and start voting, I think through the likes of social media activism per se, and in general, the larger narrative that is around people like me and my peers, I think it's important that the image mending of sorts, I think, takes place quickly, because I feel a lot of times, given how, it's a famous quote, I think falsely attributed to Winston Churchill, which says that if you're a conservative when you are young, you have no heart, and if you're a liberal when you're old, you have no brain, something of the sorts. So I think right now, it's important that in order to capture the young votes, BJP tries to do something more than what it is already doing in order to win votes. You talk about Kashmir. I think Kashmir, BJP may have been the single largest party to win the maximum votes, but I think if you look at it from a different angle in terms of the number of seats that they contested to the number of seats they won, I think alliances do beat BJP out there as well. So there's no clear path assigned, and I do not think that the saffron wave is necessarily going to dominate. It may happen, but I think 2021 will be the year to look out for that.
Mm-hmm. Ojasvi, what about you? You have the rise of the BJP in the country, which is now the central pole of the Indian polity. And it's driven by the ideological framework of Hindutva. And that has been not just a 5-6 year project, that's actually a 100-year project. So RSS started in 1925, now you're approaching 2025, and you see this dominance of this formation. How do you look at it? Your generation looks at this Hindutva and the politics based on Hindutva.
Well, I can't speak for my entire generation, but I can speak about the urban youth at least, because I've interacted with them more frequently than anyone else. So I think, like Pratham mentioned, this social media narrative that is being built. I think, first of all, my generation and even myself included, these terminologies that everyone on Twitter, on Facebook, when they write about RSS or the political atmosphere, keep using about Hinduism, about Hindutva, about what means what. I think my generation is not clear on that, right? So if you ask, so you will see 100 people opposing Hindutva. Right? There was this entire campaign which went on Instagram saying, when people started saying, I'm ashamed of being a Hindu, right? People from my generation. So one thing is that you ask and you talk to them, just tell me, what do you think Hindutva is? And everybody will give you different explanations, which are just made up out of thin air, right? They would have no understanding of how RSS started, what RSS is about. But since the social media branding and the narrative has been built to the point that nothing BJP does, nothing RSS stands for, nothing good that they both combined would ever do would make anybody happy, because that's just how the narrative has been built for so much long. Also, this Instagram, somebody, I don't remember who, but somebody had called our generation the Instagram generation, which is so true, because all our information, or at least most of it, is what we receive on Instagram, on Twitter, on Snapchat, on Facebook, on all of these social media platforms. And what's interesting to note is that, say, for instance, on Instagram, right, people think that Instagram is a place where you only post pictures about yourself and your life, when actually it is actually a place where you can influence thought process, you can influence conversations, you can build narratives the way you want it to be, right? So what a really tactful thing that the left does is, what they do is they break down issues. Okay, so on Instagram they would make, say, 4 posts breaking down issues, so that in the simplest of forms, so that everybody who reads it understands. So you ask them what Hindutva is, because the post says that Hindutva is this oppressive, misogynistic, patriarchal, dominant ideology that will sort of, murder all minorities in the country. They will believe that, because that is what is broken down to them. That is what is conveyed to them, and they have not heard of anything else. I think, honestly, a lot of the issues that our generations face in terms of a political understanding would be solved if we had discussions from and heard both views from both the sides. What Instagram, Facebook, Twitter does is that it sidelines the issues and narrows it down to whatever the left wants to convey to them. And I think that is something which is really problematic, because you talk to students in colleges, all of them will give you the same points which they got from some random Instagram post, instead of reading a book, instead of talking to people who are opposed to their views. And that is where all of this wokeness binds this entire system together, because it is connected with everything. Wokeness makes you extremely intolerant, right? Intolerance leads to you refusing to have open discussions on topic. That leads to formation of these mobs and these like secret echo chambers on other social media platforms. And that just keeps going on and on without any interruption from the other side.
Well, that's a fair point. I just got a message from Pratik. His Nana has been taken to hospital, so he had to leave the discussion and go. So, Pratham, how do you look at this Hindutva? And there are, there's lots of discontent which you see among the younger generation. There's lots of opposition, and certainly, Ojasvi pointed out, you don't find any of the religious communities saying, "I'm ashamed to be a Muslim, I'm ashamed to be a Christian, or I'm ashamed to be a Buddhist." What is this curious phenomenon all about?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, because I think the people that I have interacted with, at least to that extent, try to understand what the narrative is before they create and try to form an opinion on it. Which is to say, I may not be an expert, but until and unless I know everything, I will try not to comment on it. And in doing so, I think whatever, leaving the politics out of it and understanding what largely the ideology behind the entire thing is. And I've had interactions with a lot of people from different ideological mindsets. I think one thing that the BJP has done badly in terms of in terms of, say, portraying their agenda, is just to the way they have communicated the entire of their, particularly the second term, if you have to talk about that. I think just in general, there has been very little clarity from this government's communication about how exactly are they gonna go about and introduce policies and laws and get them into legislation, right? We've seen that happening with farmers' protests. We've seen that happening with the CAA. And I think, number one, that needs to definitely change. As far as Hindutva specifically is concerned, I don't know if I particularly feel whether it is good or bad. I just feel whether you're talking about things like CAA, the left has been, for like, if you're relating that to the larger idea of Hindutva, I think the question that we're asking is pretty wrong, in terms of saying that, okay, today if I'm on the left saying that CAA is bad in entirety, I think that's not a fair choice to make, and that's not a fair statement to make. Saying that, say, okay, even in a scenario where you're excluding Muslims from the procedure that allows them to get fast track citizenship, that is wrong. But in entirety, the concept is not wrong. In entirety, the way they have gone about building the whole structure to the thing is not wrong. Maybe some parts of it which are exclusionary are wrong to that extent, and something that I too feel is true. In saying so, I think the fundamental principle which I think is lacking in this communication, wherein you're not able to effectively communicate the policies. Obviously, as has already been said, a lot of it is also aggravated by the likes of social media and Instagram in particular. To that end, I think I have just one and two problems, in fact, with the whole thing. One being the fact that, I call this PowerPoint activism, because I think that's what it is. When you put up 4 posts on Instagram and you think that you're spreading awareness, I feel it doesn't end there. I think you need to take up the onus to do something much more than that. And just assuming that your job is done only because you have posted something doesn't cut it. I am not saying that everybody who is against Hindutva or for Hindutva has, say, a wrong opinion. All I'm saying is that irrespective of what you may believe in, it is just important to hear both sides of the story, something a lot of people are not doing today. And I think it's completely wrong.
Mhm. Well, it's an interesting point, because after 2019, all the studies basically came out with the conclusion that social media does not play much role in mobilizing the votes. It's basically the boots on the ground, your party organizational machinery, which ensures that you get the vote or not. But Pratham, when we look at young people in the school and colleges these days, it seems that they know more about the American politics. They're more interested in what AOC and all those people are saying, what Trump is saying, what Biden. So, I mean, it looks like they are electing not the American president, but the Indian president. But they know very little about Indian politics. They just don't know who Chaudhry Charan Singh was. They don't know who Devi Lal was. They have no idea who Sharad Pawar is. What is that? What is that thing?
Two responses to that. I think, firstly, this whole idea about, say, them not knowing about Indian politics, I just feel like a lot of it is also associated with the fact that you're supposed to be cool when you know about what's happening around the world, when you can talk about stuff like global politics and international relations and throw it in the air saying that, okay, I know stuff, so I'm cool. So I think number one is this whole idea that emerges out of wokeness saying that, okay, because I want to be relevant in the society, I need to have an opinion. Because I need to have an opinion, it has to be, say, a more refined opinion, something that people feel, because like the other people may not know enough about, is okay, easily talk about American politics, say whatever, your lies are not going to be get caught. Number two, I think in general, to be very honest, I think the Americans have designed a system that makes their American democracy largely very attractive, in the sense, through public course, through this through, say, participation in debates, through the primary process, through, say, active family members also participating in the politics of the country and taking a big role in it, and especially in largely also including the fact that the American hegemony has existed in the past for the longest time. I think all those things do make it a little more interactive and attractive, in the sense that when the American elections happen, there are consequences that are, say, spanning across multiple continents. For example, on, say, what a bullish or a bearish sentiment be on the equity markets given President Trump is re-elected, or if Vice President Biden comes over and takes the center stage, you have markets all across the world that are going to be affected, and they're going to take that into consideration. So I think, given the fact that it is the United States, a lot of weightage comes from that. But I think largely the whole idea around that is the fact that people feel that it's somehow cool to know American politics better than your own homelands, which is sort of saddening to see at this point as well, given how I think Indian politics may not be as attractive, but is certainly the most interesting right now, the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Ojasvi, there's a big problem these days, and even French are talking about it, that you somehow have this tendency among the younger generation, especially in the English speaking world, the Anglosphere, to judge everything with America as the reference. So you judge Indian Constitution or this whole slogan of Azadi, Azadi, liberty, which is the American Constitution. The American Constitution is based on liberty, whereas it can be argued that Indian Constitution is essentially based on the justice, not on the liberty. So even in the French system, they have a different system, but somehow when the French are trying to crack down on the religious extremism, that is somehow, fascism and those kind of language which is being used. How do you see it? I mean, why do Indians specifically do not read their own constitution, but are adopting the constructs coming out of American universities? Why is that happening?
Okay, two things here. First of all, I've said this for as long as I can remember. Our generation is immensely influenced by the West, right? From the way we dress, the kind of music we listen to, what we think is normal social behavior, the kind of books, media, whatever we consume is focused on mostly the United States. And that also influences our politics. So when like Pratham said that, let's say it's cool to know about, it's cool and trendy to know about what's happening all around the world. Agreed. But I think also another important point is that you can break down, let's say, you take the major American issues that are there in their politics. You take the Second Amendment, which is guns. You take free speech, you take abortion, you take immigration. You take all of these main issues and then you can break them down, which makes it easier to understand than Indian politics. Right. So, for instance, breaking down on the issue of the Americans' Second Amendment, which is guns, right? The right to bear arms. You can say I either support it or you don't, right? You can put in a few hours, few days of research, and then you get to decide where you are. So, if you support the Second Amendment, you go into the conservative right-wing category. If you don't, you go into the left-wing category. With India, I feel the issues that we have are much more complex than that. So, for instance, you take Ayodhya, right? Such a civilizational issue, but that also means that it needs a lot of research and effort to be put in order for you to understand that. In order for you to understand where you belong, in which box you belong, what your ideas are, what your morals are, you need to first be able to understand the issue. While you do research on Indian problems, I personally find it a little more difficult than doing research on American issues, because there they have clear-cut lines almost, right? Here you look at Sabrimala, right? There is so much information out there and nobody's trying to break it down for students, because honestly, which 16, 17-year-old is going to sit down, leave everything else and do the heavy amount of research that is required? We we are lazy people. We would rather watch a video which is like a 5-minute video than do research which could take days to understand an issue. So I think that is another reason why a lot of us don't know about Indian issues, even though they are immensely of high importance. And like Pratham said, it's cool and it's trendy to know about the West, because the West is our sort of
Not
the
the West,
center.
essentially America, not the West. The West is a wider category.
Even the West, even Canada, even all of these places where you have singers coming from, these influencers coming from. So of course America is there, but I would say the left, the West. And secondly, I think with students, it's also that, like Pratham had said earlier, that he has interacted with people who say that I have not done my research yet, so I don't know where I stand. So I would rather find out and read up before making my opinion. I think that is such an amazing thing to have, which is something that I haven't really seen. I haven't seen it in schools in Delhi. I haven't seen it at Hindu, at LSR, at Miranda, at Stephens. I haven't seen that in these colleges. Probably because they are as politically charged that they would like to have opinions, because there was this really interesting line which they started revolving on social media, which was, if you are apolitical, if you do not comment on an issue, that means you are to be blamed for whatever happens. Right? So if I would say that, I haven't read up, I don't know, I would rather sit and listen, they would tell me that, Ojasvi, if you're being apolitical, that means that you are as guilty as the perpetrators. Right? You're as guilty in whatever happens because you are being apolitical. And how can you be apolitical when the world is ending? So that kind of plays on with all of this.
Mhm. Perhaps people should be taught more philosophy, so they can start by reading Taoist philosophy of China, right? That
Honestly,
it doesn't matter what you do, nothing is going to change.
Student activism in China, in Beijing, under the communist rule, please read up on that before you go out on streets and outrage about everything that you have here.
But China is not a communist society. So their framework is actually legalism. So it's a very old Chinese philosophy, that absolute authority of the state, which is absent in India. So Chinese believe in that legalistic construct. But coming to you, Pratham, discussing a lot about what the BJP does, what America is doing. I think you come from Chandigarh, right? So you are born and brought up in Chandigarh. So once you come to SRCC and you are in Delhi University, you're meeting people from different backgrounds, coming from small towns, maybe coming from villages as well. Not that much in North campus these days, but yet there are people coming from different parts of the country, different caste and communities. What's your take on it, in the sense that what have you learned in the past 2 years? Have you interacted? Have you ever reflected that your interaction extends beyond your own comfortable social circle, or is a very homogeneous kind of circle that you have? And the other people's as well. It's a general commentary on the social interaction in the colleges.
No, I think that's a really interesting question, because come to think of it, I remember my first day in college. I walk into my classroom and I see all these faces, and I tell myself that, there's no chance that I'm actually befriending any of these people in my class. And I mean, just a week later.
And why is that? Let's be open about it. Why did you think that?
I just feel like not because like they came from a different background. I think to people my age, especially, it doesn't really matter. I think people I feel that I would be comfortable be talking to would be people I share same views with, have say like mutual interest in. I think it was very wrong of me to actually form an opinion that fast. But in saying so, I think it just didn't feel that a lot of these people will have the same interests as me in terms of say, following a particular thing, or like say actively watching football or stuff like that, very random stuff, right? And I think that was quick for me to like judge and determine, which was ultimately wrong, because absolutely 1 week later I was pally with these people, and in fact going out and eating with them, and like actually even today I think these are some of the closest friends I've made in college. So I think definitely one thing that college teaches you, especially when you're coming and transferring to a completely different, migrating to a completely different city, is the fact that number one, you now know that it's all you, and you're not going to be going back home, and you're not going to be served food, and going to be just properly taken care of. So you have to be independent in terms of knowing that, and you need to take care of yourself, has to be number one. And secondly, just the people you interact with. I think interacting with people in college from all sorts of backgrounds, I've seen like people who hail from Kashmir, and they've told me how the stories and how they have been affected by personally what has happened in the past and what is happening now. And largely coming from, they say, the South, and how politics works over there, and how the culture in general is so different with respect to the meals they eat and the meals we then start sharing together ultimately as we become close friends. So I think that has been a drastic change of environment, and something that I'm extremely grateful for, because it has helped me, push out of my comfort zone and start talking to people I otherwise wouldn't interact with, and get to know them better. And in doing so, I think get to know the world better.
But do you think there is a this regional divide, cultural divide, caste divide, class divide in the college and in the North Campus? Do groups form on that basis?
I think I wouldn't say a class divide per se. I think cultural divides and cultural barriers may still say make it a little bit difficult for people to interact. I think I know people who are, say, very proficient in Hindi and not that great in English, and English being the language that is, say, supposed to be the universal language and that joins the country, because people in the South do not know Hindi. I think that sort of becomes a barrier for people to interact with. In doing so, I think there are certain times groups that are formed, but doesn't mean that they're very concentrated and that they do not allow for, say, any interaction with people outside that ambit. I think that's not true. And I think definitely class isn't something that is really something that I personally experienced being a larger part that leads to, say, alienation or, say, any sort of marginalization of people. I think that's not something that happens. And I think that's something also that we as individuals growing up in the 21st century haven't really had to experience the atrocities of the past. So I think in a way we started with a clean slate in doing so. I think it's just that it doesn't come innately to us that, okay, this is something that has to be taken into consideration, which is good.
But English as a universal language, I'm coming to Ojasvi. I started teaching from Zakir Hussain College, and for the first time, I realized that English is not the universal language, because those were economic students, and many students told me, "Sir, could you please teach in Hindi?" And that is the Zakir Hussain. That's not even a college outside Delhi. Then I realized, so because we have been educated in school and college in English medium, we think that English is universal. But in fact, very few people in India understand English. But Ojasvi, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so, growing up, I never really paid attention because I didn't have to caste and class, because, you make so many friends, you don't know, who's coming from where, and why would you even bother asking, right? But in college, I was, while studying, we are made to feel like there is a huge divide. I never really paid attention to which of my friends belong to which caste, which class, where they come from. But in college, it's so different for me, because suddenly I am
Hold a second. Is it because your school group was completely homogeneous?
It wasn't actually. It wasn't. So it wasn't homogeneous in any way. I went to a convent school, so there were lots of, and it was a convent school, but we had people from all sorts of places, from all different religions, all castes, all geographical areas, even though it's a school in Delhi. But in college, of course, there is no diversity here, but we are specifically made to feel like there is a caste divide, right? We are made to feel as if it's almost guilt tripping us to some extent. I never paid attention to which caste I belong to, right? But I was reading through one of the first papers in sociology, and it made me feel as if, it's wrong of me to belong to whatever caste I belong in, right? That apparently everything is the upper caste's fault. And I'm not denying that there have been many atrocities on the basis of caste, but teaching me or making me feel or making other students feel as if all upper caste students, all upper caste people are somehow inherently to be blamed for what has happened for the past is something that I just do not subscribe to. And that is something that they have made me and a lot of people feel in classes after we joined college.
Could you
That
tell,
was
tell
interesting
us
to
more
observe.
about the sociology syllabus in the university? Because really, I don't know.
Right. So
What did it teach you about different aspects?
not just sociology. So while I was filling up my application for Delhi University, I had a few courses in mind. So I had philosophy, sociology, and political science in my mind. And I was going through all of the syllabus that they have on their website. And what's interesting to observe is that most portion of the syllabus is left based, is leftist teachings, or even if when it's not, it is taught to you, because I have friends in colleges who, unlike me, actually have been to their college and who have who attended classes physically, and and they used to tell me that even if a topic, a paper is not left centric, it will be taught in a certain way that will make you think that it is. Right? You look at the syllabus of sociology, and I mean, it's just so absurd to even imagine how much of a dominance, of a hegemony does the entire left has on college institutions. You are training people, training students to think in a certain way. You will not say this, nobody will exactly come up to you and say this, but it goes on very subtly for a very long period of time, and that's how you end up making so many people who think the same way, who are not open to different ideas, who had not been taught how to think critically on their own. College is supposed to be a place where you're just given all points of views, right? These are the views, these are the events, these are the facts, and you make up your own mind. But that is not something that I'm seeing in liberal arts, at least. I don't know about SRCC and other colleges, but
Well, we
definitely
don't
not
have
happening.
liberal arts, but we do have political economy. And
Mhm.
when I was a student in Hindu, and you're missing out on lots of fun, Ojasvi, Hindu is a fun college. We were taught political economy syllabus. It was a completely Marxist paper. I see that even today in the economics honors syllabus, that's a complete Marxist paper. But luckily, that's about to change because, like, I'm also there in the UGC committee now on the syllabus, so we are completely restructuring the entire political economy paper. So no Marxism. You bring in different points of view, institutional view. No, and there was nothing on the Indian political economy. It was all about what happened in the medieval Europe, feudalism, and this and that.
Right.
So we are we
So
are
that
we are
adds
completely
on
changing
that
it.
that adds on to your point about why we are so interested on everything that's happening outside of India without knowing what's happening in our own home.
People don't know anything about Indian political economy, but they know what happened in the medieval German town. So anyway, I think we're running out of time now. And Pratham, how do you see the future trajectory of your generation? What do you feel? Will it go the completely woke way, this kind of what you see in America these days, or do you see that it's going to be more centrist, or it is going to steer towards the BJP and let's say the what in India is called the right wing? Although I mean I don't know in what sense BJP and RSS is right wing because all their policies are left wing. So
No, I understand the fact that if you take, Hindutva out of the entire BJP's manifesto, you aren't really left with the right party in India, given how, conservative right wing is supposed to be traditionally orthodox, but then you have, say, a lot of policies in, for example, Uttar Pradesh that support the likes and the rights of all these people from different identities and yada yada. In saying so, I think the larger trend that we're seeing around the world is something that I also feel is happening is massive polarization. Like I think case in point, 2020 United States election. You have Donald Trump who's gone so far right that in order to the polarization is so peak that Biden, who's a central leftist and isn't, say, somebody who runs, say, towards, say, the likes of, Bernie Sanders or AOC, is being constantly pushed towards the left in order to get those democratic votes. So the simple principle that I identify here is that as long as somebody is going far right, people on the opposite side have to respond to it by going on far left. And that ideological gap that completely widens and widens and widens ultimately turns out to be problematic in any country. Case in point, for example, Hungary with Viktor Orban, or like Italy, Salvini with Italy, what's happening in Italy. In doing so, what I feel about our generation is that there's one unique characteristic about our generation. I think Barack Obama has spoken at length about it. Narendra Modi has leveraged it in terms of his campaign policies, in terms of just resonating with the voters through building in digital capabilities in their election and using that to ultimately channelize their propagandas, right? So I think social media is going to play a big part in that. And it's obviously exhibited a lot of biases in the past and ultimately is not stopping anytime soon. So I think curbing misinformation, making sure that people still have access to right sources and people are able to essentially break away from echo chambers, right? Because if we are consuming our news on social media or for the likes of Facebook, it is just going to reinforce our biases. And what we want to see is ultimately what I will end up seeing. So today, if I identify myself on the center left and I want to understand how Hindutva works, I think that won't happen because Facebook will never show me something like that. I think that needs to change, and needs to change on both sides of the spectrum. Other than that, I think Raghuram Rajan talked about this one thing that, back in the early 2000s, when he used to come back to India, he used to just sense a positive energy channeling the country and that India is going to be something big in the next decade. I think we are a decade past that, but we still yet to experience that change. Let's see what happens in the future, because right now, the way I see it, India needs a very strong opposition party. India needs a leader of opposition that can guide them through the process and ultimately hold the democratic process in the highest of standards in order to ensure that ultimately people know all those sorts of things exist and are able to just form their opinions after reading each and everything that they have to. So I think, yeah, i'm
So
I'm
that's
looking
that's a
forward
vote
to.
of no confidence in Rahul Gandhi-led opposition, right? So, but Happy New Year to Rahul Gandhi in Italy. But Ojasvi, what about you? How do you see your generation going whichever way?
Well, honestly, I think I agree that there is a lot of polarization, and we need to find uh, somewhat of a middle ground to at least have conversations. But honestly, I think in terms of policies, when there is a time to make a decision, you have to sort of just do it, right? You can't make policies based on that, I'll take 50, you take 50, so that both of us are happy. I mean, look at what's happening in the world with China, right? Why do we like I why do we why is there so much conversation going on about how Nam messed up, right? Because when you have to take a position, even if some may call it polarized, and if you think that is what is required for the country, you can't do 50-50 middle path. So that way, I think my generation are opinionated enough to either support it or not support it. Any policy which is passed, we would either be for it or against it. You can't have 50-50. You can say that improvements are required, but at the end of the day, you will be either for the policy or against the policy. And I think that is something that my generation understands. And even though all of us are opinionated without doing a lot of research, they will take their stand regardless.
Okay, that's an interesting point. So unfortunately, we have to end here, but we will continue these kinds of discussion with the younger generation, with more undergraduate students from different parts of the country. So thank you, Pratham. Thank you, Ojasvi. Thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
holding up the discussion because Pratik had to drop out, unfortunately. But in the end, thank you, audience, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.